On this Thursday night, a major step for Alberta's West Coast pipeline plans, the proposed route, and political compromises.
We do not have the authority to stop a new pipeline.
As BC strikes its own multi-billion-dollar deal with the feds. Russia's all-out assault on Ukraine's capital. What triggered the biggest attack on Kyiv since the start of the war. A miraculous rescue in the rubble of Venezuela's earthquakes. The man who survived 8 excruciating days buried under tons of wreckage. Plus, cell phone fee fight. Why Canada's big 3 telecoms are in trouble for those extra charges on your bill.
Global National with Donna Friesen. Reporting tonight, Jeff Semple.
Good evening and thank you for joining us. Canada is taking a major step tonight towards building a new pipeline to the West Coast. Later today, the Alberta government is expected to outline its pipeline proposal, including the route. BC's premier has voiced fierce opposition to any pipeline through his province. But today, during a press conference with the Prime Minister, David Eby struck a different tone. Our Heather Yourex-West joins us from Calgary with the details. Heather.
Jeff, there is so much riding on this pipeline proposal, not only for the provincial government and the province's main industry, but also the federal government as it deals with Alberta separatism and concerns related to the BC coast, which may explain why the Prime Minister was so busy today.
8 months after Alberta's deal with Ottawa that set the stage for a new West Coast pipeline, BC has cut a deal of its own.
Today's Canada-BC agreement will maintain the federal North Coast tanker ban.
Making the announcement in Vancouver, the Prime Minister addressing West Coast concerns early, hours ahead of Alberta's announcement that will unveil the proposed pipeline's final route. With the North Coast ban protected, the BC Premier says he will not stand in a new pipeline's way.
We do not have the authority to stop a new pipeline. We will not be going to court to fight a pipeline project.
We are very pleased to hear that the North Coast will remain protected from the threat of an oil spill.
The North Coast ban means if built, Alberta's newest pipeline will have to go south, like TMX, to ship as much as 1 million additional barrels of oil a day out of the Port of Vancouver.
It takes about 36 hours less time to get to Asia from northern BC as it does from southern BC. And so that's why we believe that the best place to put a pipeline is to Prince Rupert or Kitimat.
But the Prime Minister will try to make a case for Danielle Smith's pipeline as he travels to Calgary to stand alongside the Alberta Premier when the proposal is at last made public Thursday night.
Once this proposal is submitted, all eyes will be on the federal government. It will have until October 1st to decide whether or not to declare this pipeline a project in the national interest, a timeline that is significant considering Albertans head to the polls to vote in that separation referendum just a couple of weeks after that. Jeff?
All right, Heather Yourex-West in Calgary tonight. Thanks, Heather. As Heather mentioned, the Prime Minister is trying to strike a delicate balance between Alberta's push to expand the oil industry and BC's concerns over preserving environmental protections. And there was a lot more to that multi-billion-dollar deal announced for BC today. Ben O'Hara-Byrne is tracking those details and politics for us from Victoria. Ben.
Thanks, Jeff. Yes, the Prime Minister called David Eby, the Premier of BC, back from a trade mission to China to make this announcement. We now understand why. There's a lot in there that was on BC's wish list, including a lot of money. There's money for something known as the North Coast Transmission Line. That's to electrify the North, provide clean energy to things such as LNG and mining. There is money for port infrastructure. The Port of Vancouver, by far the busiest in the country. There's big bottlenecks there. It may also allow for a southern pipeline route, but we'll get to that as well. There's money for a copper mine in BC, as well as plans to expand critical mineral development. That's been a big deal around the world for the Prime Minister. BC integral in all of that. Money for something known as the Massey Tunnel. This is one of those commuter projects that's dogged many a government in this province. So up to $3 billion from Ottawa to help get this project, which is late and over budget, off the ground or moving along a little faster, and support for LNG projects such as LNG Phase 2 and Siliciums, another big project that BC is banking on. The Premier obviously very pleased about what he heard from the Prime Minister, what this deal entails. Have a listen to what he had to say.
This is a BC agreement about BC projects. It, on our math, approaches $20 billion in commitments to this province. It is a generational federal commitment that we have been asking for a long time.
Another thing that BC has been asking for is for Ottawa not to lift the federal tanker ban, the northern tanker ban. And Mark Carney has agreed to that, which in many ways is exactly what BC was looking for. Now, this may land Mark Carney a bit of trouble with Alberta. Alberta's been wanting to go north with this pipeline route. This clearly rules that out, as far as we can tell. The opposition Conservatives have been asking for that ban to be lifted. But listen, BC was adamant about this. This was a red line. They said lifting it would threaten other projects that are already underway, that have First Nations approval, that have community approval in the north of BC, and to not respect this tanker ban would be to put those in jeopardy. The Prime Minister was clearly listening. We know how important BC is to his plans to diversify Canadian trade. That was on display today. Jeff?
Ben O'Hara-Byrne in Victoria. Thanks, Ben. These major development projects come against a backdrop of economic uncertainty, one day after the U.S. formally announced it will not renew CUSMA, the North American Free Trade Pact. Speaking to Global News, America's top negotiator detailed a list of grievances. Taria Isri has more on the U.S. trade irritants and what comes next.
I work directly for President Trump.
The U.S. won't rubber stamp the North American Free Trade Agreement, widely seen as a historic success.
We're not renewing as it is right now.
Why? Well, America's top trade official is pointing in part to Canada's warming relationship with China. U.S. Trade Representative Jameson Greer spoke to Global News the day after the United States decided not to extend CUSMA.
What I don't want is a situation where Canada's bringing in a lot of Chinese investment in Chinese cars and sending them into America. Like, that is actually totally at odds with what we're trying to do here.
To reduce reliance on the U.S., Ottawa has grown closer to Beijing, including a deal to bring in Chinese EVs. Prime Minister Mark Carney was caught on hot mic last month, trying to reassure U.S. President Donald Trump about the agreement. That rapprochement appears to be a sticking point, along with Canada's dairy supply management system and a previous attempt to get U.S. streamers to pay more for Canadian content, something Canada backed down on.
Obviously, that's good. It's good not to do something you shouldn't have done to begin with.
Canada and Mexico had wanted CUSMA renewed, which covers roughly $2.5 trillion in trade annually.
CUSMA is in place, and the government has been at it, working with the negotiating.
The move triggers rolling reviews and a 10-year clock on its expiration.
I think what we can expect is a continuation, maybe even an intensification of demands for concessions from the U.S. on a wide range of things.
Tariff-free access remains for most Canadian exports, but the tactics are shaking one of the last predictable pillars of trade. Taria Isri, Global News, Montreal.
People in Ottawa are mopping up after a record 118 millimeters of rain fell on Canada Day, flooding roads and basements. Crews working around the clock to restore power to many areas. The severe storm even abruptly canceled several Canada Day events, including the fireworks. Environment Canada says it was Ottawa's rainiest July 1st on record. And parts of Manitoba are also underwater. Premier Wab Kinew visited the city of Dauphin today to survey the damage caused by flooding across northwestern parts of the province this week. Dauphin declared a state of emergency on Wednesday after receiving more than 115 millimeters of rainfall since Sunday. That's nearly half as much rain as it saw during the entire month of June.
Folks in the parkland have seen flooding before, but not like this. Not to this extent, not to this scale, not hitting this many areas of the region at the same time.
Dauphin's mayor says water levels are receding. They're now cleaning up and assessing the damage. The premier also requested help from the military, with floodwaters blocking access to roads throughout the region. Well, turning to news overseas now, the mayor of Ukraine's capital has declared a day of mourning after Russia launched its largest missile and drone attack overnight, killing at least 27 people. There are widespread injuries and severe damage. More than 100 buildings were hit. Russia claims it targeted Ukraine's military in response to Kyiv's recent attacks on Russian oil facilities. But as Redmond Shannon reports, Ukrainian civilians and residential buildings were hit hard.
This is one of the buildings the Kremlin says is a military-related target, an apartment block in Kyiv. One of a number of residential buildings hit in Russia's huge ballistic missile and drone attack on Ukraine's capital. And these are the victims. injured, but many thankful that they're alive. Some of those lucky enough to escape unhurt are now homeless. Everything is destroyed. I don't even know what to say. People are still trapped under the rubble, says this woman. The mayor of Kyiv, Vitaly Klitschko, called it the most massive attack on Ukraine's capital of the 4-year war. A record number of people reportedly sheltered in its subway. Russian attacks have increased in intensity in recent months. A Red Cross warehouse also hit in Kyiv, destroying more than $2 million worth of equipment. The Kremlin says the attacks were retaliatory, a reference to Ukraine's recent attacks on oil facilities deep inside Russia and bridges in occupied Crimea. They have triggered fuel shortages, which even Russia's President Vladimir Putin acknowledged as a problem.
Of course, we're asking President Trump, his team, yes, Russia. That's only one thing.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky returned early from a foreign trip to see the damage. He promised revenge, saying he wants peace talks but needs more military aid.
You see what does it mean when the packages come to Ukraine slowly?
The European Union's foreign policy chief says continued military support for Ukraine is crucial and that the more Russia attacks civilians, the more sanctions it should face. Redmond Shannon, Global News, London.
The British Prime Minister has formally apologized for the government's role in separating unmarried mothers from their babies. The practice began after the Second World War and continued for almost 3 decades. During that time, an estimated 185,000 babies of unmarried mothers were adopted in England and Wales.
It is a stain on our history. Mothers, many young, vulnerable, and without support, were coerced, bullied, or misled into feeling that they had no choice but to have their children taken away from them. What a thing to do.
Keir Starmer met with some of those mothers at Downing Street. He also announced better access to adoption records and mental health supports. And returning to our top story and breaking news, the news conference is underway in Calgary right now about Alberta's pipeline proposal. Let's listen in.
Including with Indigenous peoples as full partners, and they will create resources for the social programs on which Canadians rely. This is cooperative federalism at work. It's the kind of unity and collaboration that Albertans and Canadians rightly expect. They expect it on principle, and they expect it because it's required for Canada to prosper in a rapidly changing world. Parce que c'est la bonne réponse à une crise énergétique sur 3 niveaux, l'abordabilité, la sécurité et le climat. Nos alliés le reconnaissent et les Canadiens et Canadiens le savent. You asked for it, we promised it, now we are delivering. Because when we work together, Canada controls its future. This is a new approach that helps us reach our full potential, one that builds in partnership, the federal government, Alberta, British Columbia, partnership with territories, partnership with Indigenous peoples, partnership with the private sector. Indigenous peoples, full partners in development, operating, and equity ownership. We've agreed, or at least I think that's what's in the submission that I may get momentarily, that the best route for a new pipeline is one that goes through one that already exists, south through the Trans Mountain Corridor to our Pacific coast, the gateway to the world's fastest growing markets. We've already agreed to reform carbon markets so they promote real emissions. We've already agreed to substantial methane reductions and to new measures, new incentives and reforms so that power markets can grow sustainably and affordably, and this being Alberta, significantly. We will maintain, the federal government will maintain the tanker ban to protect Canada's coastlines and precious habitats, and consistent with the MOU as a prerequisite for the pipeline, the Government of Canada the government of Alberta and the Oil Sands Alliance, the 5 companies in the Oil Sands Alliance, have now agreed on the terms to launch the Pathways Project, the world's largest carbon capture and utilization and storage project, which together with other emission reduction commitments in the agreement will achieve 16 million tons of emissions reductions per year, or the equivalent of taking 90% of the cars in Alberta off the road. Critically, what we've agreed is that the time for action is now. We will refer a submission that I may receive, Alberta's West Coast pipeline project proposal immediately to the Major Projects Office. Consultations will begin immediately with Indigenous communities, relevant provinces and territories to determine listing under the Building Canada Act by October 1st, as per our agreement. Cet accord est bien plus qu'une entente entre 2 gouvernements. Il donne aux entreprises la certitude dont elles ont besoin pour investir et bâtir. This is more than just an accord. It's also an approach that gives certainty to our businesses to build. Canada and Alberta will be equal partners in this project. As I said, meaningful ownership stakes available for Indigenous communities. We'll also benefit from Indigenous contracting and employment alongside funding to strengthen that capacity. The Trans Mountain Corporation will plan and construct the pipeline. They will work closely with Pembina Pipeline Corporation, who will bring its private sector expertise, its capital discipline to the construction and operation of the pipeline. And I'd like to thank the CEO, Scott Burrows, for his leadership and his presence. We are all living through a moment of unprecedented global volatility. Our role as government is to be a catalyst. Part of being a catalyst is to bring greater certainty, reduce risks facing private capital so there's more opportunity and more energy when shovels hit the ground. Ensemble, l'oléoduc et Pathways vont créer plus de 100 000 nouveaux emplois à haut salaire en Alberta, en Colombie-Britannique et, plus que ça, à travers le pays. Des emplois pour des travailleurs qualifiés, des ingénieurs et des techniciens canadiens. De vraies opportunités pour les entreprises, des contracteurs et des travailleurs autochtones. Now, we've started as we mean to go on. We will continue to work together, Albertans, British Columbians, with industry and Indigenous partners at one table instead of many, to deliver. The head of the IEA said a few weeks ago, he repeated it I think a couple days ago, that Canada has a once-in-a-lifetime opportunity, an opportunity that will determine our future, an opportunity that will deliver prosperity, that will spread.
All right, so you've been listening there to the Prime Minister Mark Carney speaking in Calgary alongside Alberta Premier Danielle Smith, talking about Alberta's proposed pipeline to the West Coast and answering there a couple of key outstanding questions. One about the route, and two about whether there would be a private sector partner. The answer to the last question is yes. The Prime Minister saying that Pembina Pipeline is stepping in as the industry partner. As for the route, the Prime Minister said the best route is the one that already exists, pointing to the Trans Mountain Corridor in the south of BC. So that represents a concession from Alberta's Premier Danielle Smith, who had long said she wanted a pipeline through the north, but that would violate the North Tanker Ban, which remains in place. But clearly Danielle Smith alongside there, we will hear from her shortly, but the fact that she's standing next to the Prime Minister, I think, speaks for itself. Turning to other news, and coming up next in the newscast, a rare reason to celebrate an earthquake-ravaged Venezuela. The man found alive after 8 days, trapped under tons of rubble. The daredevil couple who scaled the Empire State Building has now been released without bail. The pair climbed the New York skyscraper's antenna on Wednesday, where they then unfurled a banner about love and peace before getting engaged. But their celebration was cut short. They were then arrested and charged with multiple felonies. The couple has since been identified as Russian nationals who starred in a 2024 Netflix documentary about their budding romance and shared love for stunts. Time is running out for rescue teams in Venezuela to find survivors buried under the rubble of last week's deadly twin earthquakes. At least 2,200 people are now confirmed dead, but there are fears the true death toll could grow larger, with thousands still reported missing. The chances of being found alive dropped dramatically after about 72 hours without access to food or water. But as Heidi Petracek reports, some are still beating those odds.
He was buried alive by what was left of a 9-story building for nearly 8 days. Thursday, rescuers brought a 43-year-old security guard out in this miraculous moment in Venezuela. In the aftermath of such devastating earthquakes, this is rare. Time is not on the side of search crews, and this operation took days after Hernan Gil Flores was first discovered alive 3 days ago.
Hernan?
Chilean firefighters got a camera through the rubble to monitor and communicate with him and used a tube to feed him life-saving liquids while they figured out how to extract him safely.
Me siento feliz, tranquila.
His wife tells journalists learning he was alive was a little ray of light in the darkness. The doctor who treated him en route to hospital says Hernan's condition is stable. These are the brief moments of hope for Venezuelans to cling to. A toddler pulled from debris Tuesday. A small dog brought to safety. But the situation is dire. Search crews are working day and night. The United Nations estimates there are 1.2 million tons of debris. Thousands of people are missing, thousands more homeless.
You take a drive in Caracas right now, and the amount of tents and the amount of people just literally sleeping on the ground because they have nothing.
Comida, leche.
Vancouver resident Arnaldo dos Santos was visiting Venezuela when the quakes hit. He's now stuck, unable to get back to Canada yet. So in the meantime, he's buying and distributing supplies to fill the immense need.
I tell you, this just the first few days that I was out there helping all day, I would get home, take a shower, have dinner, go to bed, and I would just cry.
International aid agencies warn a humanitarian crisis is emerging. Lack of food, medicine, and clean water taking a toll on those who've survived this far. Heidi Petracek, Global News, Washington.
The fight over wireless fees still ahead. Canada's largest telecom companies are accused of hitting customers with sneaky new charges. Well, if you've checked your cell phone bill lately, you might have noticed some new fees. The CRTC has noticed too, and the watchdog is now launching a review into Canada's 3 largest telecom companies. They're accused of adding wireless fees that violate Canada's new consumer protection rules. Jacqueline Hansen has been looking into the allegations. Jacqueline.
New rules that ban activation fees for cell phone and internet plans are already being tested. Canada's telecom regulator is calling on Bell, Telus and Rogers to justify fees that it says may break the rules, less than a month after they came into effect. As of June 12th, the CRTC banned charges for activating, changing or canceling accounts, fees that the CRTC and other consumer advocacy groups say discourage switching.
The idea is that it should be as easy as possible for any of us to switch from one telecom provider to another.
These are the fees the CRTC has flagged: a $40 device handling charge by Bell, a $15 SIM card fee by Telus, and at Rogers, a $40 device setup charge, all introduced in the past 2 months. The regulator already sent warnings to the companies. In response, they said their fees don't break the rules. Both Bell and Rogers said they're related to purchasing a device, not to activating a service. And Telus argued that consumers buy new SIM cards when they need to replace a damaged one or to travel, not just when they activate an account.
It appears very much that the telcos introduced new fees that they may think don't technically qualify as the kind of barriers the CRTC has banned, but which I think for most practical purposes feel like those same barriers to consumers.
Based on what the CRTC has heard so far, it's still concerned the companies are charging fees they shouldn't be. The companies have until the end of July to prove to the CRTC that they're not violating the new rules. If they can't, they could be fined up to $10 million. Jeff?
Jacqueline Hansen in Toronto, thanks. Gamers are angry at Sony after the company announced plans to stop producing video game discs. The company says it will discontinue physical game sales as of 2028 to adapt to changing consumer trends and growing demand for digital video games. But fans, retailers, and analysts are voicing concerns that the move could leave consumers unable to share, trade, or truly own their games, since digital licenses are tightly controlled. The hottest ticket in town coming up. Toronto fans brave the heat to see a soccer legend. This new protest song by Canadian rock star Bryan Adams is aptly named 51st State. The song slams Donald Trump's repeated threats of annexing Canada as well as his tariffs, though Adams' lyrics don't specifically name the U.S. president. Soccer fans in Toronto are braving a heat wave tonight to attend the city's last and possibly biggest match of the World Cup. Portugal is taking on Croatia with one of the sport's biggest stars, Cristiano Ronaldo, on the pitch in what could be his final World Cup. Eric Sorensen reports on the hot ticket.
The choice, heed the warnings to avoid extreme heat or hit the streets for the final World Cup match in Toronto. For fans of Portugal, seems it was an easy call.
To see Ronaldo and be part of this, and the fact that they are in Toronto, it's insane.
The city of Toronto opted for caution, canceling the watch party outside City Hall because of the heat.
It's doable, but it's not for everyone, that's for sure.
Most wouldn't miss the chance to celebrate Ronaldo. And for Croatian fans too, their legend Luka Modric. Toronto will be the final World Cup match for either Modric or Ronaldo. The Canadians are also training in the heat down in Houston for their next match. They will play the powerful Moroccans, who had to go to extra time against the Dutch on Monday. Coach Jesse Marsh hopes the Canadians will have an edge in fitness.
So we know we're fit. Now it's more managing, especially with the heat, managing loading so that we don't overtrain them. One of the advantages that we can have is can we be fresher and fitter and everything else.
Canada will play the first round of 16 match on Saturday, ranked 30th. They will be the underdog against number 6 Morocco. Also in their bracket, playing Saturday, France, Paraguay. Let's dream big. If Canada were to win, they would probably play France, the world's #1 team, in Boston on July the 9th. Why not? Number 34 Paraguay itself scored a huge upset over Germany to advance. And several matches have delivered high drama from the biggest names. Lukaku scored late to spark Belgium from 2-0 down to a 3-2 comeback win over Senegal. And Harry Kane scored twice to send England to the round of 16. Kane's 5 goals put him one behind the leaders in the race for the Golden Boot, Argentina's Lionel Messi and France's Kylian Mbappe. And the USA have joined Mexico and Canada as all 3 host countries have qualified for the round of 16. As the tournament has entered July, for Canada and other qualifiers, the heat is on in more ways than one. Eric Sorensen, Global News, Toronto.
And that is Global National for this Thursday. I'm Jeff Semple. Tonight's Your Canada is the South Saskatchewan River in Saskatoon. We love seeing your Canada, so please email your photos to globalnational@globalnews.ca. Thanks for watching. Hope to see you back here again tomorrow. Have a great night.